We're in a series right now that we're starting this weekend called Clickbait. And clickbait is something that you're familiar with, even if you're not familiar with the term. It basically tries to interrupt you when you're on your phone or on the web, any type of a way. And it actually calls out things that you like. Social media and other programs on the computer are familiar with what you like. So if you like cats, no one knows why you might like cats. But a clickbait would be how to get your cat to live for 30 years. Where somebody like me, the clickbait might be how to kill your neighbor's cat this year. No, I wouldn't do that. I'm just kidding, just totally kidding. But the point is that it pays attention to what you like, what you're tempted by, what you're interested in. So it wouldn't be uncommon in the month of January when you're freezing cold to see some exotic beach somewhere and click here to find out how you can have a free vacation, and on it goes. Here's what I've noticed. A lot of times what we click on is related to the topic of this weekend. And I cannot find a topic that is more perpetual and reoccurring than the topic of this weekend. I want to talk to you about insecurity and fear. Now, what I've noticed is a lot of people, they're afraid to even mention where they may be insecure. But I've noticed that fear knocks you off track. If you even study fear, I was looking it up this week and I was reminded that the top 2 fears that people have are in this order. This is the order of it. I want you to just think about it for a minute. The number 1 fear is the fear of public speaking. If you're afraid of that, would you raise your hand? Otherwise, I'll call you up here and tell you to say something. Okay, but the second fear is the fear of dying. Just think about that. Number 1, public speaking. Number 2, death. This is out of track. It's like if you're at a funeral, you would rather be in the casket than to do the eulogy. Okay, so fear, here's what I've noticed. Some people are bound by fear like God could open up a door for you to have an incredible career that is different than what you currently have, but you're too afraid to even try for it because what if you don't get it? Do you know how many people that I know, they had a great friend that walked with them in faith, encouraged them, but that friend made a mistake, or maybe there was some problems in the relationship and now it's broken, and you miss that friend. They probably miss you. But fear keeps you from calling them because what if it doesn't work out? Do you know how many young people choose a major in college that they hate because the one they're called to do, they're too afraid to go and try? So I've noticed in this verse, Proverbs 28:18, talking about vision and happiness and joy. Like I can tell when I'm afraid because when I'm afraid, I lose vision. Like right now, I'm just loaded with vision, and I know what came first was faith. But this verse says it this way: where there is no vision, people perish. But happy is he who keeps the law. Clickbait. Oftentimes when you're going through life, you might have a confidence to go somewhere, but you click like away from what you're aiming at because of fear. You can see it in the heroes of the faith. Most of these people made the cut of the Hall of Fame of faith. But fear knocked them off track for one way or another. For example, Jonah, and I've talked about these heroes before, but Jonah was asked to go to Nineveh, and he went in the opposite direction to Tarshish because he was afraid to go there, because he didn't like the people, and he didn't feel like it was a good idea. Noah, we know he built an incredible boat, but he also became the father of all drunks. The first person to ever be drunk, so drunk that he was naked and his kids were embarrassed by it. Abraham, God said he was going to have a lot of kids, but it didn't happen the way that he wanted. He tried to bail out years before it finally came true. He went with plan B. We could talk about plan B. It ended up being a major, monumental mess. But finally, God showed up when he was 100, and his wife was also 100, and God said, go to Babies R Us. It's time to have kids. but he was 100. That's nasty. What about Jacob? He was a liar. We know he carried deception everywhere that he went. What about Moses? Moses could have been afraid. In fact, he had a lot of insecurities. One good thing about Moses is that what bothered him also bothered God. He wanted the people to be set free, and so did God. But he didn't necessarily feel like he could be a good leader. He was a stutterer. He didn't feel like he could pull this off. He had a lot of fear. But he somehow got his confidence. Moses was the one who carried down the 10 Commandments, and one of them said, "Thou shalt not murder." Interesting enough, Moses was a murderer, but he still carried them down. If it would have been me, I'd have carried him down and said, "Here are the 9 commandments." I know I'd have kicked one out. What about David? He was an adulterer. Because of fear, he covered it with murder. What about Elijah? In one chapter, calling down fire from heaven. What an incredible leader. But the next chapter, he was so afraid he was under a tree asking God to kill him. What about Isaiah? That dude was weird. He preached naked for 3 years. That is also nasty. Think about it. Thomas was negative, and we call him Doubting Thomas. Jesus never called him that. That's something we call him. What about Lazarus? He could have been afraid. He was dead for 3 days. But one day, Jesus said, "Lazarus, come forth." The reason why he said, "Lazarus, come forth," because if Jesus would have just said, "Come forth," everybody would have rose from the dead. Clickbait. You ever been driving down the road and you see Krispy Kreme donut? How many know the Lord designed those donuts? But when the light is on, that is clickbait right there. Chick-fil-A. Anybody like that? I even like their principles. That they're off one day a week, they have a Sabbath, Sunday. I like it unless I drive all the way over there to order something on a Sunday. And then I just call them religious spirit. I've often thought we could grow our church if on Saturday night late we went and bought a lot of sandwiches and nuggets and brought them over here and then gave them to people on Sunday. We could grow. But I was thinking about this. I want to show you. Think about the growth of that. You know what? Let's try it. Clickbait. The way I've tried to describe this, it's like there are times when I was raising our kids. This is what I've shared for years. When you raise your kids, there are times where you just give them some advice, but it's not really that important. It's like, close the door. Don't run through the living room. It's good advice, but it's not necessarily that important. But there are other times where you have to say something huge. And you'll call them over to you, like your 4-year-old, you call them up close and you grab their face, like, because you want them to get it. You're going to grab a face if you got a kid. And you don't want to hurt them, but you want them looking at, look at me, and they will not. It will not. And it's like, do you want me to do to you what I did to your older brother? I don't have an older brother. See, you want me to do that? Because that's what I'll do. And you constantly just want them to know what I'm about to tell you could save your life. Look, it's like the Spirit of God is grabbing your face right now, saying, I want you to be a believer with faith instead of afraid. Afraid of the future, afraid of decisions that you make. You walk in a room, you're afraid of what you look like. You post something, you're afraid of what people are going to think. You finally have a relationship, you're afraid that it's going to fail. You don't trust the Lord. Like, trusting in the Lord is a better way to live. So let me go ahead and make it a little complicated, if you don't mind. Jesus said this, and this adds drama to it in a way, because Jesus said this to the people. He goes, listen, I just want to let you know, in this world you're going to have trouble. Like, he never promised you that it was going to be smooth. Like, you are going to have trouble. But be not afraid, because I've overcome the world. So why are you so afraid? Satan, to move into our homes, he has to have, he has to have a legal way to get in. But he doesn't have to have a key to your front door, like just to take over. The Bible describes him as a thief in the night. So what he does is he doesn't go through the front door. He looks for a crack in the back window that you don't even know is broken. And he can get into that window walk in, and then he has access to the whole home, and then he can actually leave walking out the very front door with swag. Well, a crack in the window in the back, it's fear. This is our weak point. This is the reason why it's so perpetual in conversation in the Bible. Like a professor in class would say, if I say it a lot in the class, it's probably going to be on the test. And this is why the Lord just keeps saying it over and over again. And here's what I know. When we are afraid, a lot of times it's right where we are called. Where you're most afraid is usually where you're most called. Like where you're most anointed is usually where you're most afraid. I think about my life, all the things that I was afraid of. Initially, way back in the day, afraid to public speak. It was just so scary for me. Then when I met Michelle, I was afraid to marry her. Even into the relationship, sometimes I wonder if it was just related to fear. My parents didn't have a good marriage, maybe I won't. Just the fear of that. Then we got married, then I was afraid to have a kid. Was afraid something would be wrong. Was afraid. I remember even at the hospital, just afraid, like, hope this goes well. Is everything going to be all right? Afraid. No one told me when your kid is born that they look different when they're born. like Hunter came out purple. No one told me that. And he looked like Veggie Tales dipped in syrup. I remember. But I still get afraid. I get afraid of every time we expand. Listen, God is never going to ask you to do something that is cake. He's going to always ask you to do something that you're going to have faith. You're going to have faith in order to do it. So you can either build your life around what fear tells you to do, or you can have an incredible life doing what God is asking you to do. I'm still afraid of things. Every time I expand, every time I try to do more, I get afraid, just like my friends, just like you, just like members of the church. So let's look at this guy in the Bible. His name is Gideon. And man, I need to move forward. But this guy, Gideon, was in a hole in the ground, afraid. He was afraid of the enemy nation. He was threshing wheat in the hole in the ground. You can't even do that in a hole in the ground. You have to have wind to separate the wheat from the dirt. But he's in a hole and he's just scared. And an angel shows up. And when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." And he's like, "I'm not a mighty warrior." Look at me. Aren't you glad that God calls things that are not as though they are? So you might be afraid, but God sees you as what you could be if you're not afraid. So, mighty warrior. So he goes, but sir, but God, like a chicken, but God. Why do we always talk about our butts when God tries to do something? Some of us have little butts, and some of us, let's just move on. I don't think I should go there. The point is, what did Jesus do whenever he was afraid? Now, you got that right. Jesus was afraid, but he didn't sin. So what can we learn from that? I mean, we're Christ followers, so let's follow him on this fear thing. Let's look and see what happened. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, which is Gethsemane, the garden, and the Mount of Olives is right next to it. It's an incredible place. There are olive trees there where the root systems are 2,000 years old. Like they were there at this moment. And his disciples followed him, and in reaching the place, this was a place where he would pray. He would usually go to this area. You always need a place to pray. Like, do you have a place to get away when you're loaded with fear like Jesus was at this moment? All right. Do you have a place to go and pray? And do you have people following you in prayer? Like someone that really prays. Not someone who says on social media, "I'm praying for you," but someone who really is. Like, you know they are praying for you, calling your name out to heaven. So he reaches a place and he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation," which we're going to learn in a minute was two different things. The sorrow they were feeling in their heart, but also they were tired, and so they kept going to sleep. So he withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, which is about like a lob wedge away. And he knelt down and he prayed. So this is what's happening. "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Now, this is very important. 3 different times he said, Lord, if there's another way, Father, if there's another way. The triune God in perfect unity having conversation, is there another way? Yet not my will, but yours be done. Jesus said toward the end of his life, he said, I came and accomplished everything the Father asked me to do. Wow. So an angel from heaven appeared, and that's what I want to let you know. When you're afraid, all of heaven wants to show up and help you. But you're going to have to set aside some time to build your spiritual side. So an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and that's what heaven does. And being in anguish, now this is Jesus in anguish. This is the word fear. Anguish. He prayed more earnestly, and now look at this torment that was trying to grab a hold of him. Have you ever been under this kind of fear? And his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. And when he rose from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. He said, why are you sleeping? Like, I need you right now. He asked them, get up and pray so you will not fall into temptation. In other words, if you stay laying down, you're going to fall back to sleep. I need you to stand up. I need you right now. Question, why was Jesus so seemingly afraid? And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and just say that Jesus was more afraid with the feelings of fear in this moment than anyone who's ever lived. And but he didn't sin. I'll come back to that in a minute. I remember this whole prayer thing. I remember when my brother, my only sibling, my brother, who I was praying, we tried so hard to win him to Christ, but he kept experimenting with drugs. And then one day he goes out and he picks these mushrooms in this field, and he boiled them in water and he drank it. And my brother's in the hospital, overdosed. His eyes are rolling back in his head. They called me in. I drove there as fast as I could. I went into the room, and my brother can't even look at me. And it was a horrible, I could describe it to you, but it's not necessary. But I just know that he was out of it. And I was thinking, we need some people to pray. I went into the waiting room at this charity hospital, and everybody was watching a soap opera, and I got up on a chair, and I yelled out, I said, what are y'all watching? And they're all looking at me like, who is this guy? I said, my brother's dying in the other room. We need to pray. Hit the deck. And they all got on their knees and started praying for my brother. This is when you get afraid, this is a good place to run. Jesus had emotion, but he didn't have any sin. So how do you know? Because fear, its primary goal is always to knock you away from the will of God. And Jesus didn't run away from the will. He talked about the will. He described honestly. But in the garden, this word anguish is agony and fear. He felt the most fear of anyone who ever lived, and it's described in the book of Luke, which we just read, by a doctor. And he's describing this through the filter of what he knows. There's a medical condition that I was reading about this week called hematidrosis. It's a medical condition where when you're under great stress, that your blood vessels literally rupture and then go into your sweat glands, and you sweat blood and water, sweat and blood. Interesting enough that Jesus, when he died, they put a spear in his side and into his chest cavity, and out came blood and water, which science says for that to happen, you literally have to die of a ruptured heart, of a broken heart. So one of the reasons why Jesus was feeling a lot of fear is because he knew he was going to be taking all of your fear and all of your sin and really working on that relationship that he so wants. So here's what we can learn. Number one, Jesus felt fear, but he didn't become fearful. I love this. Jesus, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but Jesus was 100% man and 100% God. I mean, he was born in a manger. He was raised by a family that had a lot of dysfunction. He was raised in a village of Nazareth. He had times where he was very poor and times where it wasn't so bad. He had a trade. He was 100% man, but also 100% God. So he went through life trying to identify with everything, not for sympathy, but for empathy. You can see in Hebrews 4:15, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize, means sharing the exact same feelings with our weaknesses. But we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. If you love the Lord, would you give him some praise? Come on, in this house, he went all out to reach us. All I'm really trying to say is I'm being too fancy, because I could have just said this 3 minutes ago. I could have said is that Jesus gets you. He gets you. Have you ever had a friend or a spouse or a cousin or a boss or someone who just didn't get you? Like you explained, like I have one friend, he's not my best friend, but he's in the top 10. And every time I talk to him, I can tell he just doesn't get me. Like he's always making face, like he squints and makes faces like, what are you talking about? So it just breeds insecurity. I mean, he doesn't get me. So when I'm speaking, I'm literally going, I'm a confident person, but I'm literally thinking backwards to what I said that he's not getting. So I'm always nervous, just trying to explain it really good to him. He doesn't get me. This week was my birthday, and he called me for my birthday, and he said, happy birthday, and I said, you too. It wasn't even his birthday. I was just like way off track around him. Listen to me. And I was thinking, he's on the phone. He's squinting right now. He's squinting right now. Listen, Jesus, he gets you. He's not making like, what are you doing? He gets you. So why does Satan use fear tactics? Always trying to interrupt your faith with fear. Why? Because he wants to intervene and to get you away from the will of God. And here's what I want to say. This is the boldest thing I'm going to say the whole time. You're going to regret every decision you ever make in your life that is based on fear. And I have a lot of them. On the other side of it, when you're loaded with fear and you decide to move in faith anyway, you will not regret those decisions when you're led by the Lord. God will never try to scare you. 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 7 says, God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. Older people and younger people. He's intimidated. The Bible says in the last days that he'll take older people and he'll give them fresh dreams. But he'll also take young men and young ladies and give them vision. Young people, I just want to let you know that the enemy hates your energy. And when he can't get you from obeying God, he'll just get you to prolong it until you're too old to have the energy to do what you're called to do. Everybody in this room can testify to that. I look back on when I was young and some of the things the Lord was trying to do in me. And I didn't want to do them. I felt like I would miss out. It was fear. Fear will even cause you to choose against the will of God because of FOMO, the fear of missing out. And it's all related, whether you run to God or when you're desperate or when you're in trouble or when you're lonely or when you're in a place of fear even. It's going to be determined where you run based on your perspective of God. And some of you, your perspective of God is that he's explosive and he's reactive and he's mean and he's uncaring. But if you know that he's compassionate and loving, like no one ever loved you like he does. My kids, when they would get afraid, they would hear thunder, or maybe they would have a bad dream. They would run into our room. Mommy, Daddy. You always run to who loves you the most. You run away from who doesn't. What I've noticed as a parent and even as a grandparent, the number one thing that you want is for them to not be afraid. If you want to zoom it all down, you want them to have faith, like to believe, not to be loaded with fear. This week on Friday, I had a little birthday party, a few family members coming over, and Katie walked in, and she wasn't panicking. She's just a really cool, calm mom. But she walked in, and she goes, guys, I don't know how it happened, but Jack, he got locked in the car. He's outside. And the keys are in it. It's the only key we have. So we go out there, and there's Jack in his car seat just sitting there smiling. Hey! But we're like, man, what are we going to do? So from that point on, we called AAA, but every decision from that moment on was to try to keep him from having a panic attack. It wasn't hot. It was that one cool day this week, so we had that going for us. It was also morning. We had that going for us. And the car was in shade, so we weren't worried about the temperature. We were worried about fear. So we made a decision. We'll just break one of the windows. Oh, that'll freak him out when he hears that. So we'll just wait. So as AAA was gone, we were just at the window going, hey, what's up? Dancing or whatever. Trying to get him to relax. I don't know if you've ever thought of this, but Jesus, he doesn't sit on a throne of dictatorship. He sits on a throne of grace. What his favorite thing to do is to build relationships with people. And you can see Hebrews 4:16 says, let us then approach God's throne of grace. A lot of you don't even know that's what his throne is called. It's the throne of grace. With confidence, of course you will. So that we may receive mercy. Everybody say mercy. Mercy. And find grace, say grace. To help us in our time of need. A lot of you don't even know the difference between mercy and grace. I'll give you the shortest one. Mercy is not giving you what you deserve, like hell. Mercy is not giving you what you deserve. Grace is giving you what you don't deserve, like heaven and Christ and forgiveness. I don't know about you, but I want them both. But what you must know, God bless you, sir. What you must know is that he loves giving grace and mercy and blessings. Number 2, Jesus, fully aware, but still cried out to the Father. All right, this is very important, okay? I'm just going to say it this way. Here's how I'm going to set it up. He was 100% God, so here's what I've noticed about your fear. Most of your fears are speculative. Some people buy commodity based on speculation. Oftentimes, even when gas prices are high, it's speculators just playing around with the markets, trying to guess. But in our lives, most of our fear is speculation. Like 90% what you're afraid of is not even going to happen. But you don't stay up all night long thinking about how great things are. So fear, you speculate. Like, man, I just love my friends. But what if they don't love me? If they stop loving me, my life is gone. You know, you just kind of bring it to a place of negativity. You have to guess. You have to speculate a lot of times to build your fear. Jesus didn't have to speculate because he is God, and he knew 100% for sure exactly what was going to happen to him on that cross. He knew about the scourging. He knew about the crown of thorns. He knew. Some of you have been physically abused. And the pain of that as a pastor, Jesus knew he was going to be physically abused. Some of you have been verbally abused. I've never been physically abused or verbally abused, but I have some friends that have, some members here. The pain of that, he knew he was going to be verbally abused. They beat him, and then they hurled insults at him, and they laughed at him, but he did not retaliate. Sexual abuse. Some of you have been sexually abused. I never have been, but I have some friends that have. Jesus was not necessarily sexually abused on the cross, but he was naked, and they were making fun of him, and can you imagine the embarrassment of all that? He was fully aware of what he was going to go through. So he was also emotionally abused, but he was also spiritually abused. My God, why have you forsaken me? Like he had to be separate from the Father to take on your pain. So here he is. Very interesting to me. This is the most important teaching that I'm going to go through. Here he is 3 times in the garden. By the end of this time, the soldiers and Judas came up to expose him. Like Judas said, this is him. Judas exposed who Jesus was with a kiss. Can you imagine that? So now he's arrested. He knew this was going to happen. So 3 times he pleaded with the Father. This is what he said. If there's another way, like I'm all into it. Not my will, but yours. But is there another way? Is there another way? 3 times. There is a common doctrine that is moving around right now in the church. And it started with a book called Love Wins several years ago. Basically going against doctrine and theology, saying that ultimately we're going to all be forgiven. Like ultimately, there's a lot of different ways to the Father. You can get there any way you want. And it's in a hyper mode. Some of them even believe Satan is going to end up in heaven. Which means right now in heaven, Abraham and Hitler are sitting together. Okay, they believe that there's a lot of different ways, but I just want to suggest to you, if there are a lot of different ways, then don't you think the Father would have chosen one of those paths when His Son is saying, is there any other way? If there was another way, the Father would have picked it, and if He didn't, then I have no honor for the Father, because that means He only allowed Jesus to die for drama and theater. But that's not the reason why He did it. He did it because He loved you. He knew there was no way that He could build a permanent relationship unless you fully had a Redeemer, and His name is Jesus. And if you love His holy name, let Him know. He had to do it. He had to do it. Number 3, Jesus knew the designer of fear. Jesus was being attacked by the spirit of fear. He was attacked 2 different times when He was weak. After 40 days of prayer and fasting, He was attacked by the enemy. And now, right before He goes to the cross, He's being attacked by the enemy again. This is what the enemy does. He tries to get you when you're vulnerable. And I don't want to make this sermon about Satan. I want to make it about Jesus. But Jesus knew that fear was not something. It was someone. Just like forgiveness is not something. It is someone. And the nature of Satan, he masquerades around like an angel of light, trying to deceive people. And his number one tactic is really to put fear on you. But here's the great news. Like the biggest fear, and I could read a few verses to show you this, the biggest fear that people have is dying, like dying. And I have people come to me and they talk to me about this. Let me just tell you, every believer in this room, look at me just for a minute. You don't have to be afraid of death. Jesus paid a huge price so you wouldn't have to be. Let me just go ahead and zoom in a little more. You will never be in a casket. You will never be under the ground. The moment that you die, you're going to be in the presence of God Almighty. There'll never be a moment where you're more confident and more secure. And I just want to let you know that Jesus rules by peace. He is full of peace. He is the Prince of Peace. Satan is ruled by fear, and he's full of it. Let's just leave it at that, all right? So how do you defeat fear? Number 1, admit when you're afraid. Admit when you're afraid. This is a very interesting story. There was these 2 girls who had Jesus over at their home, and one was afraid and freaking out. Like, there's a lot of pressure to have Jesus live in your home. Just like we do as believers, you know, it's a home. We represent Christ. It's for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And she was afraid. It's pressure. Jesus here, we got to get this right. So she just calls out to Jesus, Jesus, I'm doing all the work. My sister's over there. She's just worshiping you. She doesn't even care. Jesus, don't you care? This is what happens when you're under fear for a while. You'll have this conversation with the Lord if you're honest. Like, don't you care? You don't care. This is what fear does. Ultimately, it just puts you in a place, and this is where the fear just continues to grow when you think that the Lord doesn't even care what you're going through. Jesus, don't you care? My sister is not even helping me. And Jesus said, Martha, Martha. Like, if he has to say your name twice, you better listen. He said, Martha, Martha. Few things are necessary, really only one. And you're not getting it right like your sister is. Be not afraid. I think the first thing that we can do to get back our faith is to admit that we're afraid. And then number 2, bring that fear to the altar. I'm going to close out just by reading 2 verses. Look at this, Psalms 34. I prayed to the Lord, and he answered, and he freed me from a few of my fears? No. from all of my fears. I just want to let you know that you don't even need to remember what they all are. Just pray to the Lord. Look at this verse, talking about the altar of God. It says, cast your cares on the Lord, and He will sustain you, and He will never let the righteous fall. Cast your cares. This word cares, like cast your fears, things that are heavy in your heart. It says cast. Everybody say cast. I was thinking cast. I don't know what for sure that means. Is like a fishing term where you cast out. Is that what it is? So I went and looked at it, and it literally means that you take a fear that has been binding you for years, maybe even your parents. Maybe it came when you lost a loved one. Maybe it came when you were in a doctor's office. Maybe it came when your kids went wayward. Maybe it came when you thought it was all going to work out, and then you ended up experiencing more loneliness than ever before. I don't know where your fears come from, but I do know that ultimately the enemy tries to bring these fearful moments. Cast. It literally means you take this fear and you bring it to the presence of God and you drop it. That's what it means, cast, like drop it. And don't pick it back up. Listen, if you could somehow see in the supernatural right now, and I'm not trying to get spooky on you, but there are angels all around this room. And if you could somehow, just for 5 seconds, see in the supernatural, you would never be afraid again. And I just want to let you know the altar of God is powerful. Stop being afraid. Just cast your fear. Drop it at the altar of God. Come on, let's pray. No one looking around.